Okay, this week I have the pleasure of hopefully introducing you to somebody for whom I'm a big fan. His name's Giorgio Sancristoforo. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. That's
Sorry.
correct.
He's a phenomenal guy, but mostly I got to know him through the software he creates. He created a number of software packages. Probably the most famous was the Gleetchlab series, but the one that I fell in love with was a software package called Berna, which attempted to emulate some of the functions, but also some of the limitations of the original electronic music studios. And so I've been showing that to everyone I can. I love the software, and with that, I want to say hello to Giorgio. Hi, man. How are you doing?
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very fine. And you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for being on the podcast. I was really excited when you were willing to do this because I want to learn more about the background of the software that you wrote. So
Yes.
I've already started blabbering about Berna. I'm a big fan. I use it to show students in university some of the things about the original electronic music studios. I also share it with every other instructor and student that I can. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you made that software and some of the details in creating it?
Well, yeah, it all began in the mid 2000 when I was making some documentaries about electronic music, and I was doing that for the Italian MTV. And I've been always a huge fan of contemporary music, and I have a electronic music background mostly, but not only in the contemporary field. And well, I visited the original studios here in Milan at the Studio di Fonologia, the electronic music studio founded in 1954 by the composers Luciano Berio and Bruno Maderna, and I felt in love with the equipment. You know, these huge machines were built inside the national television to create a laboratory for electronic music, but not also, because in the morning, the studio was working as a post-production facility for the national television and the radio. And in the evening, in the night, the artists came in and they could do whatever they want. And we had such composers from also United States, like, of course, John Cage,
Mm-hmm.
hosted there too. As a matter of fact, he did realize two important pieces. One was made at the studio, and it was the Fontana Mix.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that was, I think it was 1958.
unreal.
And we still have in the museums in Milan these equipment. And along that, we find the original notes of John Cage, who did redesign the equipment on some paper,
Uh-huh.
millimeter paper.
Right.
So we use that as a historical documentation to see how the studio changed in the 60s and in the 70s.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And then at some point, I have to say almost immediately, I started thinking, well, why don't anybody try to simulate this equipment to show the kids who are learning electroacoustic music or synthesis how it was done, how it was different from the paradigm of sequencers and drum machines and synthesizers that we had in the 70s and in the 80s. So it was a very instructive idea. It was something meant to be an aid for students.
Right. Right. Well, that certainly aligns with my experience because in working with it, two things happen. First of all, people are amazed at some of the limitations. I think it has been so long since we've been controlling electronic music instruments with keyboards, either through MIDI or
Yeah, that's
before that
correct.
through control voltage. And when all of a sudden your only means for controlling pitch is by turning a great big knob.
Yeah.
It's a little scary.
Yeah, it is. It is, of course, the era before the control voltage, and it was all manual stuff.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, Berna cannot simulate the most important phase of the work of that times, which was the tape manipulation. Berna, it's
Right.
only partially simulating that, and that's of course something I cannot do in Max MSP very
Right.
easily, or maybe I will do it in the future. But nevertheless, it shows you exactly the limits, and the limits are very important because the limits are much more like an algorithm.
Right.
And when you have those pieces and those limitations, of course, you end up making music that sounds like in the 50s. And so it's pretty interesting to see how it was different, how much was complicated, and of course also intuitive
Right.
in some ways, especially in the Moderna poetics, which was kind of very different from, for example, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Moderna was the one who had a more profound sense of history. He was well aware that it was about evolution and not making stuff from scratch. It was evolution. So it was the practice, the electronic musical practice of Moderna and also Nono, and indeed, of course, Berio was more musical to my ears.
Sure.
So this equipment is very primitive, of course, but I ask also myself, what happened if this equipment is used by modern musicians?
Right.
Does something can we have something new from this? I don't know. I think it's possible. However, the principle, the most important focus about that software is education and learning history through experience.
Right. Now, I actually think that the educational aspect is important, but really, some of the way that Berna emulates an electronic music studio shows also some of the preferences that
Yeah,
electronic studios used to have. So right now, in our modern day, where we have either software instruments or modular synths or whatever, we can have a vast array of whatever. But
indeed.
what was clear in looking at the Berna software and your sort of like encapsulation of the studio is that
Hmm.
there were two areas that were really important in these early studios. One was these high precision oscillators and
That's true.
having a
Yeah,
bunch of them.
yeah. That's correct.
And then secondly was having a lot of tape recorders.
Yeah,
Right? And
that's true.
there was
That's true.
actually relatively little gear in between the two.
That's correct. In well, of course, the tape recorders. I start from the tape recorders because I think it's the most important.
Right.
The tape recorders where the more you had, the more things you could do. And they had, if I remember well, they had at least two recorders or four recorders at a fourth of inch
Quarter inch, yeah.
and mono. And then they had also two Studer 4 tracks, the same used by the Beatles in the
Right.
60s. And of course, these tapes were all synced together by a machine built by the physician Alfredo Lieti. Lieti was the physician working inside the RAI, the national television, and he was in charge of the technical equipment. And he did build a lot of processors that not even the German studio had.
Uh-huh.
For example, in 1954, this studio was the only one on planet Earth having nine oscillators, which
Mm-hmm.
was kind of big, because Stockhausen did most of it works with one oscillator
Right.
only.
Right.
So it was before the RCA synthesizer in Columbia University.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a kind of breakthrough of technology. And of course, the most important thing for them, I think, it was the construction of the timbre, of the color of the sounds. That's the reason, because they used scientific machines. Of
Right.
course, they had only that, but those equipment sometimes took from old radio departments was measurement equipment, was
Right.
just stuff to measure stuff.
Yeah.
And and then they used this measurement ideology of music perfectly written in milliseconds and frequencies. That required those kinds of machines, because the synthesizer is not so precise. The synthesizer is an approximate machine, which also is very mostly used in a tonal way.
Right.
But those instruments were forgetting about everything about tonal and harmony. It was all about frequencies and micro distances from the notes.
Right. Well, and
So
also the ability to build up timbre
yeah,
through this manipulation and the
yeah.
mixing of many oscillators.
Yeah, that was an idea of course, of the different composer who went in the studio and asked equipment to Alfredo Lietti. Henri Poisseur, who written this electronic piece called Scambi, who it basically was the use of random short envelopes of noise. And those equipment to do these random envelopes were built inside the television by Alfredo Lietti. So he built a lot of specialized equipment, very, very new actually.
Right.
And that was the power of the studio. They don't have to rely only to, for example, oscillators coming from Germany or England. They built stuff inside.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's yet another one of these considerations. Not only was the technology immature, but in a
Yeah.
lot of cases it had to be developed, or maybe something existed, but you just couldn't get it. So you'd have to make
Yeah,
your own versions.
yeah, they don't have budget.
Right.
You know,
Right.
the national television told them, okay, you can do whatever you want, but no money. You do
Right.
this at no money. Uh, that was the point. Of
Right.
course, it was national television. We have national television in Italy. We have networks are just stuff of the 80s, 90s,
Mhm.
but the private networks are very recent in Italian history.
I see.
We had this national big television, fantastic with excellent radio programs and television, but they had no money for electronic music. They say, okay, we give you a technician, a physician, and every equipment you want to dismount in the basement,
Hmm.
and you can build whatever you want.
Right. Just don't ask for a check.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's it. But this way, anyway, they produce so much music, so interesting. For example, electronic poetry, and so many radio programs. That's fascinating. I find radio the key of electronic music. The radio, the way it was written, it was not for they written electronic music not for the records, not for the LP. They written electronic music for a radio experience.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of interesting though, because you talk about this in Italy, but there are similar stories
Yeah, yeah,
throughout Europe and even in some cases the United States. But it tends to be more of a European thing because of this concept of the national TV,
exactly, exactly.
and the fact that ended up almost like a venue for experimental sound
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, that's correct. That's what happened exactly in three countries very similar on this point of view, which are Germany and France.
Hmm.
Of course, the first experiment of Pierre Schaeffer, Richard Ferre, Pierre Henry were in the national radio of Paris, of
Yeah,
France.
right, of France, yes.
And of course, in Germany at WDR, in Cologne, they made this electronic music with the national radio.
Hmm.
So it was also Poland. It was the same, you know. It was a kind of, I don't know, cultural expansion to new frontiers by the national big networks, you know.
Right. So now, in attempting to emulate what they did in these studios, what is the thing? What are the things that were hardest to emulate using today's technology? Obviously, tape manipulation is one. There's
Yeah, the
not
tape.
really an easy equivalent of
No,
physically cutting or stretching the tape
no,
or any of that.
it's not possible. I mean, it's I don't know. Maybe with the new Max, I think it's the number 7.1 actually.
Right.
It's possible to do some stuff, but the point is that you miss the physical
The
experience of tape.
physical nature of it. Right. Yeah.
You know, when I started sound engineering in the early 2000, I was using tape. I was cutting tape as an exercise, so I really know the difference between digital manipulation and analog tape. Glue, copy and paste on
Right.
the.
Right.
That experience. It's unique, of course, but the machines, they are the blocks on which we have built, for example, Max MSP or Pure Data. They are the same actually of the studios, like in the field. They have just more
Right.
new features, but the
Right.
basics are still there. I mean, modulators, ring modulators, oscillators, filters. That stuff is the building block of electronic music. So it
Sure.
was not difficult to make it. It was impossible, of course, to reach for an original sound, even though I made some experiment, for example, using the Studie 2 of Stockhausen about the sound, how to make it sounding like the original recording. But Berna is more like on the process rather
Right.
than the sound.
Right. So now I want to talk about another piece of software, and this is the one that you actually first came on my radar because of this, and it was the Gleetchlab software,
Yes, yes.
which was probably the most over the top looper type system I'd ever seen in my life. It broke my
Oh my
head
god.
sometimes. It was so complex, but it was one of those things where it took a couple of basic concepts like um, this cross patching modulation system
Uh-huh.
and multiple either synchronized or unsynchronized loops. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
those kind of concepts. I mean, they got in my head, and even though I stopped using Gleetchlab, so many of those techniques became really a part of my personal shtick. Right? How much of that was your personal vision for an instrument?
Well, Glitchlab exactly born because I was looking for a very personal instrument. And since my first experiments with Max MSP, and I started using Max on version, I think, 4.3 on the OS 9 on a Mac.
Hmm.
Since then, my idea was to work on sounds, on loops, in a different way, not on a rhythmical way,
Hmm.
but rather with the intention of creating a stream of sounds. So this idea originally was called haiku, but it never went outside my home.
Okay.
It was just the first experiment of a few modules which I call haiku because they were small and little processors
Hmm.
combined together. And then, of course, you know what happens when you start patching. You end up patching more and more and more and more, and the stuff became big and bigger and bigger. And at one point, I decided to create this little monster called Gleetchlab. And if you ever seen the first version or the second version before the number 3, there is no Gleetchlab version the same. I mean, every version has completely different processes.
Okay.
I don't make it to, I just don't look at this as a kind of commercial thing. I
Right.
think that Glitchlab is more an expression of my poetics in sound in a particular moment.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, the newest version of Glitchlab will be completely different, almost very different in terms of processes from the version number 3. But of course, what happens that you give your tools to other people and they start making stuff you can't even
You
think
can't
about.
imagine. That's
You
right.
can imagine, of course, they start exploring it and exploring it, and they create their own personal vision.
Hmm.
And I got fascinated by this idea of creating my instruments because I was a fan, of course, of Donald Buchla and Robert Moog and all the inventors, incredible inventors. And also, I think that composers are inventors. So I think it's the most logical thing for an electronic musician to start building instruments. I don't know, with software, it's so easy now that's to me it seems almost impossible to make electronic music without making software for making it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it does seem like there's a resurgence of interest in making personal instruments.
Yeah, yeah,
But you were out on the front of that because you were doing this, using Macs, but sort of doing it in an instrument building way rather
yeah.
than in a coding way, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, my question is, how do you take something that you think of as your personal instrument
Uh-huh.
and then sort of like swallow hard and say, okay, everybody, here it is. You want to buy it? That has
Yeah,
to be really
yeah.
hard.
Well, um, I have this feeling about my software. So of course, they are kind of childs for me.
Hmm.
And I realized after some time that those software are my music in a way. And my music is my software in a way.
Hmm.
But, to share those instruments for a very fair price, it gives me lots of satisfaction because I can see people using it in new ways and creating their own music. So I'm happy because I've created something for me, but also for the people, not just for me.
Sure, sure.
Of course,
I
I have secrets. Of course, I have
right, right,
secrets. Of course, I have some process which I don't show,
right.
but I love to create stuff for people.
Sure. Now, one of the things that I and a lot of people who follow your work were very sad to see was the statement on the bottom of the Gleetchlab page that says no Gleetchlab 4 will be produced.
Yeah.
Except recently in your blog, you said, oh, I'm going to have to make Gleetchlab 4. But
Yeah.
also, you mentioned that it will be released along with like a release of your music. Is that true?
Yeah, that's a new idea I have. Actually, there has been a time in which I wanted to explore new things beside Gleetchlab.
Hmm.
Especially, I got very interested deeply inside the computer-assisted composition using, for example, software like Open Music
Right.
by DRCAM.
Hmm.
And so for a time, I've been much involved in that kind of instruments,
Right.
and I wasn't sure about making another version because I would like to underline these are not really real commercial software. Those are kind of little ideas I give away.
Sure.
And but at some point it was it was Max MSP 7 who changed my idea because I saw many possibilities for new versions, for new processes, which was, for me, unavoidable. I was like, I cannot stop it, because it is so beautiful. I have some wonderful tools now that I cannot do this. I must create another Gleetchlab.
Right, I hear you. So some of why Gleetchlab 3 kind of was put away was because you wanted to explore some other things.
Yeah, and that's reflect, as I told you, the fact that these software are not made for a commercial idea of big mass selling of process of softwares, and also.
But do you think that that's important? Because here's what I would say. There are certain kinds of software, like, let's say, Ableton Live or Pro Tools, where they have to exist for the mass of humanity to use them, right?
Yeah.
But I think that an increasing amount of the most interesting music-making devices are these kind of personal, idiosyncratic things. And whether you're talking about, again, like the new modular synthesizers, some of the crazy little guitar pedals and stuff that you can get, the resurgence of tape loopers that is coming along, as well as looping in general, all these kinds of things, none of them are really mass market devices.
That's true. That's why we have this incredible explosion of little digital devices such as the Raspberry or Arduino.
Right.
And of course, the stuff you're saying is true. The most biggest breakthroughs are in personal technology rather than in mass market technology.
Right.
I make this software because I feel something in a particular moment of my life, and that's the reason. There's no other commercial intention behind it. There's no. I like to give it away, but if I don't feel it to make it, I'm not interested.
Right. Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
It's like making a song, It's like finding the good chords you want to use. That's like it. It's inspiration.
Sure, absolutely. So when do you think Gleetchlab 4 will be available? Do you have a sense of when
I'm sure it will be 2016.
Okay.
But you guys have to be a little patient because I'm kind of halfway finishing programming the software. The state of the project is quite advanced at this moment. So it's sure, you can be sure that you will have Gleetchlab 4 in 2016.
Okay.
I choose also to try a different way of making people getting in contact with the software. I wanted to unify this with my music.
I see.
That was, of course, possible and I think necessary because my software are a way to support my artistic activity, buy equipment and make other software for people, It's something I share and something that helps me to make music.
Got it.
It's like, and if I make an album, I would like to not just only make an LP with the software, but to give people also pieces of sound to try to experiment at first.
Right.
That's an idea. I want to share music and software because in my point of view, they are the same thing in a way.
Let's talk a little bit about these documentaries that you did for Italian MTV, because it's clear to me that the process of putting those together really kind of influenced the way that you became an artist, or changed maybe the way that you became an artist.
Yeah, that's true, of course, because what I wanted to make these documentaries, had the chance, for example, to interview Pansonic or Herman Sherman, the one from the Sherman Filter Banks, or the guys at Jomox. And of course, also at the end, also Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. There's a 1 hour big interview at the end of the DVD.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, all these experiences really had a huge impact on my music making and software making. So it was then that they became a single reality, two faces of the same thing, you know. I meet incredible persons. I met, inventors. I have a deep love for their work. So I wanted to be an inventor in a way.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because some of the people you talk about, whether it's the inventor of the Sherman filter bank, or Panasonic, or Karl Heinz Stockhausen, I can't imagine meeting them and not walking away with your brain changed a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's impossible not to be changed, you know.
Right.
Those days I remember them very heartily because they were a very important part of my career.
Right. Now,
They,
I'm
you
I'm
know,
cu- I'm curious about
mm,
how you got the opportunity to do this because
uh,
and what is the background that got you in a position to do that? Because it's clear that that sort of launched you in a direction.
yeah. Well, I started all as a sound engineer. In my experience, in my work, I had to work also with video at some point. I began using editing stuff,
Hmm.
editing software for video, also very interesting equipment like as the Quantel IQ equipment. I'm talking about very professional cinema grade THX stuff.
Right.
And so I had a huge technical background with super professional equipment for cinema, for example. Cinema, and I mean post production, audio post production, and video post production.
Sure.
For example, in 2004, we were working with 2K technology. And it was like, very huge, very big. It was incredible to have digital projectors, 2K in 2004.
Hmm.
Once I got known this incredible equipment, incredible mixers and stuff. Of course, I had a pretty good idea how to create my stuff if I learn a language, to create my processors, my filters, my loopers.
Right.
So here Max MSP came in. It was around year 2000. That's the main background. Then I had a musical background, but it was not institutional. More with private lessons
Okay.
with composers. I also did assistant at composition because, of course, my experience in 14-year experience with Max MSP put me in a position to know very well real-time electronic music,
Hmm.
and also some stuff of computer-assisted composition with Open Music and PWGL, for example.
Right.
So that's basically my background. But of course, I did many jobs in the sound industry. For example, advertising and some movies and music, pop music. But at the end, contemporary music has been the most interesting field for me for many years. Of course, when I was very young in the 90s, I used to make drum and bass music live with synthesizers and sequencers and stuff like that. But with the age, after the 20s, 25, then Karl-Heinz Stockhausen came in and all the rest.
And the rest goes away. Right.
Yeah, because I always was not very satisfied with dance music. With the problem for me is that it has a very limited language in terms of rhythm,
Right.
and I wanted to break the chains of these sequential pattern ideas. So that's why I started programming, because I wanted stuff be alive of themselves. I love generative, algorithmic, experimental stuff.
Right.
I like alive things. That's that's the thing.
Sure.
Kind of Frankenstein.
Right. It's interesting that you'd taken that approach and really to go from drum and bass to desynchronized looping washes is quite a jump.
Well, I've been an 18 years old boy in the 90s.
Uh-huh.
So the 90s, you remember we
There's
had,
a lot going on. Yeah.
yeah, I've been using computers since 1982.
Mm-hmm.
I was chatting on the telephone with a modem and a Commodore 64 in 1987. So the computers were really part of my life since my child age.
Right.
And in the 90s, the computers were kind of powerful, but not that powerful. The internet was so slow. The CD break very easily. I started hating CDs because all my CDs, they had these scratches, and they started glitching, of course.
Right.
And at some point, of course, I started getting interested in these noises. You see, at some point you realize, oh, this sound is beautiful.
Right.
And of course, we had incredible artists such as Pansonic and Oval and Otecre and Microstoria and such as that. I mean, the glitch movement has been very important because I was raised in the 90s.
Right. So kind of seeing the glitch type things move from something that made you angry into being something that was artwork.
Yeah, that's correct. From disappointment to excitation.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
And that's a part, of course, because if you are into electronic music in the contemporary music scene, contemporary classical music scene, the timbre is so important. It's so important to study new timbres, to create new sounds, that, of course, glitching and creating data errors or using stuff, basically, the point is using stuff in a different way,
Right.
you know?
Right.
At that point, everything became useful to make stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny because sometimes and I was in the middle of it, and it was a very important time for me too, but it's sometimes hard to remember a time where computers were not powerful enough to do audio.
Oh.
It's hard to remember that now because it's been such a thing for over,
Yeah.
more than a
I
decade,
remember, I remember, oh my God,
Right.
those days bringing with me an Atari with the CRT monitor, which was so heavy, and all the samplers.
Right. The
People
samplers.
today, they have a computer with thousands of samplers inside, and maybe they can have full polyphony and stuff like that. But in the 90s, it was such a pain to do electronic music,
It actually really was. You're right. Well,
Yeah.
it's that's an interesting background, though, and I really appreciate where you're coming with that. Now, one of the things I'm curious about is, and I can't believe our time is already running short. I can't believe that, but whatever.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great.
I'm curious. In addition to doing the work on the next version of Gleetchlab, what else is in your future? What do you have going on, and what is the stuff that's out there that excites you right now?
Well, I have a pretty intense live activity. For example, I was in Mexico one week ago for a festival, for an electronic music festival in San Luis Potosí. And then I had a concert in Milan and one in Rome and one in Florence. And all these gigs were different. Different technology, different ideas, different patches. Pretty much of my life is occupied by live music, concerts, and sometimes installations. I did a big installation here in Milan, in the Royal Palace in Milan, close to Duomo, in late spring. So I have, educational job as a teacher of Max MSB sound design.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's a kind of middle way between sound design class and electroacoustic class.
Where's this at? Where do you teach this?
It's the CAA college in Milan, and I've been teaching there since 2001. 2001. Okay. So it's 14 years. So I've been teaching synthesis, analog synthesis. I was the one using modular in year 2000 in the school. Everybody was looking at me like a freak, you know.
I know.
Yeah, it was like, what's this? You know, the people and yeah. But nowadays it's normal. Nowadays, oh yeah, it's a synthesizer. Oh yeah, it's a modular. But in the days, in the 2000, a modular synthesizer was like, what is this Frankenstein stuff? Right. You know, that's it. So I teach and I make live music, and in the spare time I make software.
Sure. So how do you get your gigs? What is it that how do people learn about you and your work?
Well, of course I have a website, which is myname.net.
Right. I'll post up a link because
thank you.
Anyone
thank you.
who isn't already visiting there, I need to get them over there because there's
yeah,
some fascinating
and
stuff.
I can suggest you also the website of AGON, which is the contemporary music center I work with, which is in Milan, which is an historical contemporary music center. We made electronic music of with Stockhausen, Luciano Berio, and you know all the important composers of electronic music in the last 70 years. And the center has been there since the early 90s and made kind of 300 huge productions.
Oh, wow.
With institutions such as La Scala Theater, the IRCAM, the STAME, the EMS in Sweden, and the Living Theater in New York. So they made big, you know, electroacoustic programs there. And of course, they are specialized in software programming like Max MSP, Pure Data, or Super Collider. Mm-hmm. So that's my second home, and we have very interesting artists with me, like such as, for example, Pietro Pirelli, who has, for example, the biggest laser harp ever, like 20-meter.
Oh my goodness!
Laser. Yeah, that's huge, and that's the way the people can know me. Mostly, of course, I am known because of the softwares. And that was very important for me to help my artistic activity, creating software for people.
Right.
So I help people, and I've been known for my software, and that's important. It's great because now people is asking me, of course, classes and concerts and stuff like that. You know.
Right. Well, I think that it's important too by doing software development and putting it out there for people to use. But by doing that, it's interesting because probably more than even a music release, people can understand who you are by looking at software that you've created.
That's why I sell them together. Because the sounds I make are a part. Right. Of the whole picture. The software I make is definitely for me a little piece of art like music. It's that's the reason, because I never make the same software over and over again with the same features. That's the reason why I don't have perfect schedules. That's the reason why, because I can be free of creating anything it came in my mind. And that's funny. And people is happy because I am giving them every time new tools.
Right.
And I tried that. The most important thing for me when I started off with Max was to create stuff that it is not out there yet.
Right.
That is like very personal. Like I'm creating my idea of this stream of music, and then of course people can do whatever they want with it.
Fabulous.
So that's why they are together. Exactly. I think they are the same thing. You
Yeah,
know.
right. Good point. Yeah, they're your artistic output. Right.
Yeah. That's correct. That's correct.
Well, Giorgio, this has been a fantastic and illuminating discussion. I appreciate you spending the time. I have a question that I sometimes like to ask people, and I'm going to ask you, which is, or if you met an 18-year-old version of yourself, what would you tell that person in order to help them either do better work or have less problems, or how would you help that person?
But we're talking about a career thing or a
I don't know.
philosophy.
Maybe.
Well, the first thing I would like to say to myself in the past is please study C++. Please, I beg you. And the second thing, I think, well, I don't know. If I could do my life back again, of course, I would like to have also traditional music education. I mean, like cello. I mean, I know how to play the bass. I've been playing bass for so many years, but I cannot call myself a virtuoso of an acoustic instrument.
Sure.
I miss this. I think I would like to say, please have C++ and cello.
Right.
That's my idea.
That's awesome. Well, Giorgio, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks
It's been
to you. Thanks to you.
fantastic,
It's
and
fantastic. Yeah.
I look forward to us talking again soon.
Thank you very much. Thank
All
you
right.
very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Bye-bye. All right, I want to thank Giorgio again for the great conversation. If you haven't yet done so, go over to the website and check out the links both to his site as well as the AGON site. Also, you can take a look on his website. He's got links to the documentary that he did as well as some of his work and all of his software. It's fantastic stuff, so make sure you take the opportunity to check it out. Thank you so much for listening again. Just a note, I will not be doing a podcast next week. I'm going to be taking a little holiday vacation. I hope you take the opportunity to have a nice holiday off as well, and I will see you at the turn of the year. Thanks a lot. Bye.